Hi, I'm really pleased to be here with Arab Barghouti, the youngest son of the Palestinian leader and political prisoner Marwan Barghouti, and Arab has been leading the international efforts for his father's release. There's been quite a bunch of news about the plight of Marwan Barghouti in recent days, and I'm really grateful to you, Arab, for being willing to talk about it.
Of course, thank you so much for having me, Peter.
So first, there's been this very disturbing news that your father was very badly beaten by prison guards just quite recently. I wonder if you can tell us what you know about that.
A week ago, a few released detainees, actually five of them, they gave official testimonies and they even filmed themselves talking about it. They talked about an incident that happened on September 14th, and they said that they were in Megiddo prison. And at that day, the Israeli prison authority wanted to transfer my father, which they do regularly every few months, from Rimon solitary section into Megiddo solitary section because he's been in solitary confinement right after October 7th until today. And
Arab, why do they move him back and forth between these different prisons so frequently?
so, under the Israeli prison authorities law, if you're in solitary confinement, you have to be moved approximately on average every 8 months.
Okay.
You have to be moved from cell to cell, from prison to prison.
Okay.
The problem is that the transfer process is the most humiliating, the most vicious.
Mm.
And the reason for that is that there is a unit within the Israeli prison authority called Nahshon. And Nahshon is a unit that is responsible for transferring prisoners. And they are the most vicious and the most violent amongst all the prison authority sections. And while they were taking my father from Rimon prison to Megiddo prison on September 14th, they stopped at Al Jalame prison and he was shackled and handcuffed and even his legs and all of that. They put him on the ground and they started beating him up. Using their legs, kicking him, punching him. And we're talking about eight different prison guards that did that to a 66-year-old guy who is being starved, who is being tortured, who has been put in solitary confinement and punished and tortured for. Obviously, he didn't have anything to do with October 7th, but it was as part of the collective punishment of the Israeli government against the whole of the Palestinian people. And I think they're targeting him for reasons you and I know. They don't want that glimpse of hope of the Palestinian people that we have leadership that really is legitimate, that cares about us, and so on. So the actual testimony that we got from the five released detainees, they said we saw him from the door because they're all in solitary confinement. We saw him from like a small opening and we looked at it and Marwan was unconscious. He lost his consciousness after the attack and then they brought him. He wasn't conscious and it took him hours until he regained his consciousness back. And they said that imagine, like, this is someone who's unconscious. They took him to the clinic and they waited until he was waking up and give him painkillers, basically. They didn't even give him any medical treatment and they brought him back to the cell. And this is the testimony that we had, and it was, horrible to hear.
Wow. Now, I saw from the report that Israel has denied this. Is that correct?
Yeah, of course, they always deny that, but they refuse to let anyone, including the Red Cross, including any humanitarian organization, to go and visit him and validate those allegations because this is the fourth assault that my father goes through, but this was the most vicious one
Wow. The fourth assault in over what period of time?
in 2 years.
In 2 years.
Yeah.
There was also this strange report that there was a personal encounter between Itamar Ben-Gvir and your father. What do you know about that?
We know that what happened on video, you can see it. It's a 13-second video where Ben Gvir taunts and threatens my father that, if you kill our children, if you do this and do that, we will erase you and that language. And I mean, you can tell this is a bully. This is a textbook bully. I'm sure he had a tough childhood to get all these insecurities on the Palestinian people. And at the beginning, Peter, to be honest with you, I was really angry. I couldn't believe that we live in a world where Ben Gvir, who's calling for the genocide of the Palestinian people, who's bragging about the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, who is calling for the annexation of the West Bank, the Greater Israel Project, and so on, who has on his wall an Israeli terrorist who
Yes,
committed the crime of killing more than 29 Palestinians in the early 90s in Hebron Mosque.
yes, Baruch Goldstein.
Yeah, exactly. And this guy is being let loose. He goes to the United States freely. He
Yes,
goes into New York
yes,
streets, while
yes,
someone like my father, who is a
yes,
big supporter of the two-state solution and political settlement and coexistence and peace
yes,
for more than 3 decades, look at how he's being threatened in front of the whole world.
yeah.
And I think, at the beginning, I felt so angry. I felt so appalled by that scene. But then I started reading my father's writings. And I remembered the words when my father used to tell me that at the moment of crisis, because I'm a leader that represents the Palestinian people, they are going to target me and they are going to try to humiliate me in front of the whole world. And these are ugly tactics. These are the oppressor's tactics. And we need to be aware of that. And I need you to be strong when that happens. He
Mm,
used to say that since the hunger strike that he led in 2017, when they used, they posted videos of him eating, allegedly eating while he was in hunger strike, that he's cheating the other prisoners and so on. Because, this is part of what my father has been through for more than 2 decades, which is the character assassination. Because they
mhm,
couldn't assassinate him. They've tried to assassinate him 3 different times in 2001. When they failed and brought him to prison, the first thing that Ariel Sharon said back then, who was the prime minister, is that I wish he came a dead body. He didn't want him to come alive. And then they tried the character assassination against him in the Western media to make it a taboo to bring his name up and to always make sure that the media says a convicted terrorist. They don't say convicted by whom, they don't talk about his court, his kangaroo trial, and so on, but they just say that. And I think, then I looked at it and I said to myself, this picture will go down in history between my father and Ben Gvir, because this is a perfect representation of the Palestinian Israeli struggle right now. Because Ben Gvir is a perfect reflection and mirror of the current Israeli government, and my father is a perfect reflection and a mirror of the current Palestinian struggle. A man who's being starved, who's being tortured, who's being beaten while his people are being starved and genocided and so on. So this is who he has been his whole life. If you go back to his track record and the 50 years of struggling, his fate was always linked to his people's fate. And this is something that makes me proud.
mm. You mentioned earlier that your father is a supporter of the two-state solution. What's the most recent information you have about how your father thinks there should be a just outcome to how Palestinians should ultimately exercise their freedom?
I mean, listen, my father is not delusional. He understands,
Mhm,
and we had these arguments because my generation, we don't believe in the two-state solution
mhm,
at all. And we feel that the word two-state is just the magic word that Western leaders use to us to
yes,
hypnotize
yes,
us into believing that something is happening while
yes.
our land is shrinking, while they're building more settlements and oppressing us more and more. But at the same time, even though he is not delusional and he understands more than anyone the political scene in Palestine and what we need and so on, what he thinks is that the how can be flexible. But what are we trying to achieve? The objective of the Palestinian people should never be flexible or, have any question about that, which is Palestinian freedom, independence, self-determination, living with dignity. That's one of the most important things that he focuses on, dignity. He said that after the Oslo Accords, we didn't have dignity, and that was the link that was missing. And that's why we're here today, because it was a 5 year interim agreement that then we would have our full rights and full state and independence and so on. And Netanyahu came to power, and the rest is history. So I think that he supports political solutions. He's someone who talked about comprehensive resistance and keeps stressing the fact that resistance is way bigger and wider, and we shouldn't limit it to armed resistance or anything like that, or even violence. He's talking about like being educated, developing ourselves, working on our economy, working on our youth, our representation, utilizing the fact that we have 7 to 8 million Palestinians in the diaspora, making sure that they are effective in their countries with their governments and so on. So he has a full comprehensive vision. That's, my father has PhD in political science. He takes his writings very seriously. He wrote a 100-page political vision of his that includes every single aspect and angle that you can think of the Palestinian struggle, including economy, including women's rights in Palestine, because he's been a big supporter of women's rights for decades, helping my mother with her great work there, calling for elections because he wants to see more youth participation and faces within government and so on. So, like he used to always say, we need to control what we can control. And we as Palestinians, we can control our unity. We can control having a functional, healthy political system. We can control having a democratic state, a progressive state, and so on. And then we will have a way higher chance to have international partners who can help us with pressuring the Israeli government into coming to the table to negotiate a settlement that is fair to the Palestinian people. So that's his vision regarding how we should conduct the negotiations.
Hmm. So there were also reports that in the negotiations over the return of Palestinian prisoners, that Hamas had requested that your father be released, but that Israel had refused. What do you know about that?
Yeah, we know that 100% Hamas called for
Mm.
his release. And many people ask me, why would Hamas ask for his release? He opposes Hamas and he's the only one that can win
Yeah,
against Hamas in any elections, the
yeah,
only one.
yeah,
And that's true. But I think when it comes to prisoner swap, first of all, you can't get away with not asking for his name because he is the most popular Palestinian
yes,
leader.
yes.
And when it comes to prisoner swaps, if you go to historically speaking and the track record for the swaps in the past, it focuses on the human side. You go from the oldest to the newest detainees, and he
Mm.
checks every box. He's
Right.
one of the oldest prisoners. His age is more than 65. He has life sentences. He's been in prison for more than 20 years. So he checks every category and every box.
Mm.
And unfortunately, many of the governments that interfered and mediated and so on, they promised Hamas that you will get the names that you will, according to the categories.
Mm.
And
Mm.
he was checking every single box of the categories. The problem is that when the list got to the Israeli government, they changed the whole list and they played with it however they wanted. And they knew that there is an enormous pressure on Hamas to accept the deal because there is no comeback after that if they refuse the deal or collapse the deal. And they used that into their advantage and unfortunately convinced the Americans we have to go for it. This is already a compromise from the Israeli side, and they started putting that pressure. We know that the mediators did their best in pushing for his release because they understand how much he will be a great positive force to the stability of the region. If you look at countries like Jordan, Egypt, Qatar, Saudi, UAE, and all these countries, even Turkey, they all want stability in the region. That's their main idea and main objective. And he is someone that is willing to provide stability in the region because while a people, a nation that is going through a genocide, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, occupation, it's very easy to lose hope. And once you lose hope, the first thing that you do is that you go into violence because you have nothing to lose. And that's a very dangerous place to be in as Palestinians because that's where the Israelis want us to be. And that's exactly why we're pushing for my father's campaign. It's a campaign of hope. It's not only about Marwan as a person, but it's also about Marwan, the leader, Marwan, the idea, Marwan, the unifying figure for the whole of the Palestinian people, not only the Palestinian factions. He's already unified the Palestinian factions in the past, and he has the credibility to do so. But unifying the Palestinian people wherever they are. And I think he has a vision that really represents all of the Palestinian people all over the world.
Yeah. I imagine at a human level, it must have been extremely painful for you to have this possibility now that he might have been released and to watch these negotiations unfold. And I know you were probably talking to people who were involved in negotiations and then ultimately for it not to happen.
It's listen, it was one of the toughest weeks in our lives as a family. I'm not gonna lie, especially that right after we knew that he will not be released, we learned from the released detainees the horrible stories about his beatings and his conditions and so on. And it's not easy to keep going after having all these news and after seeing that the international community is insisting to keep repeating the same mistakes again and again, which is spoiling the Netanyahu government, giving them exactly what they want and not imposing on them other solutions. And my father represents other solutions and represents a different way of thinking and a different solution. But I feel that, with all that being said, I keep asking myself, how can I give up or even complain while my father is going through what he's going through? And yet he was very strong mentally because that's exactly what they said, the released detainees. They said that right after he gained his consciousness, he started teaching us. He started giving lectures from 6 to 8 hours a day on the window. Just they were just hearing him about Israeli studies, about political history, about things like that. And he started even explaining to them, historically speaking, why the oppressor makes sure to break the image of the symbols of the oppressed. And he said that, I always recall one of my favorite quotes of his, which he said, our chains will be broken before we are. And I will never lose the hope that his chains will be broken before he is, because I've never seen him broken. And I think that, also having a mother like my mother, who is a leader in her own rights, someone who is very well respected within the Palestinian community. She's been working for more than 4 decades for women's rights. She founded his campaign 23 years ago. And believe me, Peter, in every letter that I got from my father on my birthdays, on any special occasion, he keeps reminding me that your mother is the most important person in this family and in the world. And he keeps reminding us that we need to stay loyal to her and we need to help her. And I recall what he said is hopelessness is a privilege that we don't have as Palestinians. So he wanted me to even cancel that and delete that from my head. And I really wish that the time will come as soon as possible that people can get to know him. He's a great person. He's a great father, a great husband. My siblings and I, we always make fun of how romantic and expressive he is. And he keeps sending love to my mother and love letters and so on. And I think that, I always ask myself, when is the time that my mother will be comfortable next to him? Because she's been with him for more than 4 decades. He spent years and years, like even before this time, he spent 7 other years in prison. So that's 30 total years, 7 years in exile. He struggled and he knew what he was signing up for. My father, he was the head of the student council in Birzeit University in the 80s for 3 times in a row. And my mother told me that when he proposed to me, he told me that I'm not going to be a doctor or an engineer. I know exactly what I'm signing up for. And I have a future that might be dark, that I might get killed, I might get into prison. And yet he insisted on doing that. And he promised her that when Palestine is free, I promise you that we will live a normal life with our children and grandchildren. And as you know, he has 6 grandchildren that he's never met before. And my dream is that he can live with them. He can teach them the values that he taught us. He can give them the principles that he gave us. And he can talk to the whole world and they can see what Palestinians are made of and the Palestinian story and struggle in him. Because despite everything that I told you in terms of his suffering and struggles, I've never heard him complaining or talk out of hatred in my life. And even when I was angry at the PA leadership, at the division, at the Israelis, and so on, he would smile, he would take it with grace, and he would tell me that, historically speaking, we have to go through this struggle and we have to have patience in order to get over these hardships.
Arab, I imagine your father must be very, very proud of you and what you're doing. And it was a privilege to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter, of course.